Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. My name is Orion, and in this episode, I share my list of 7 skills I believe will be more valuable in 2025 and the years to come, and how I would go about learning them. So let's get into it. To put this out there right away, there are a couple common skills that I always recommend. They're going to be valuable in 2025 and 2030 and years into the future, probably centuries, if not forever. I'm going to just briefly touch on these skills and then move on to more specific skills I'm thinking about for 2025, more tangible, sort of different things that I think are going to be more prevalent in the coming years. Maybe not forever, but for at least the next decade or so, these skills are going to become more valuable. So, starting off with the common skills I'll always recommend: critical thinking, learning, research and fact checking, prioritization, discipline, patience, whatever. There's a bunch of other skills like these that are almost always going to be recommended for people to develop. So, what skills do I see growing in demand over the next couple years? Of course, almost any skill held at a high level is going to be in some sort of demand. But that's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to the people who are looking to develop a new skill or maybe are just starting off with something new and may lack currently. So, what are the skills I'm talking to them about? Let's start with prompt engineering and related AI usage skills. AI is not just a flash in the pan like the media might want you to believe. Its existing use cases are already many. I personally use AI as a research tool for generating simple social media content, including text and images. I use it for fact-checking, I use it for deep research, I use it to help me understand academic papers that I have no reason to try to read. But there's more uses for AI than just these. Work in just about any field can be enhanced or made faster, cheaper, or easier with the proper AI tools. They may not exist yet, but we can still prepare in case they do come into existence. Currently, prompt engineering is the core skill people use to interact with AI. So the skill to craft a well-written prompt is crucial to getting high-quality results. So here's how I would go about trying to develop my prompt engineering skills from zero. First, lay out your goals. What is it that you want to accomplish with the help of AI? Research available tools for accomplishing said goal. I recommend using tools such as YouTube or Perplexity AI to help you with this research. Choose your tools. Research prompt engineering basics, again, using YouTube or Perplexity AI. Watch a few tutorials on how to use said tools and follow along. And finally, experiment, branch out, and work on your own projects using AI. AI and prompt engineering skills are very much an iterative sort of thing that you try to develop. You start off with the basics, learning how the basics of prompts are put together, then eventually start to experiment, see what works well, what works better to try to get the certain types of results that you want to get from a thing. If you want to get all of your results spit out to you in Shakespearean sonnets, great, you got to figure out how to craft a prompt in such a way where you get high-quality Shakespearean sonnets for your results. The next skill I want to talk about is language skills. We live in a world of globalization, where you're no longer just competing with the people in your town or city, you're competing with people all over the world for jobs, views, customers, or whatever other desired result you may want. The world is your competition. Being able to communicate effectively, and note I said effectively, not perfectly, in another language will do wonders for you. It'll open doors, it'll give you more opportunities than you would have if you only spoke the one language. Chances are, for people who are listening to this, your only language that you speak is English. What if you were to learn Chinese, or Spanish, or French, or Japanese, or Norwegian, or something else, just another language? What could that do for you? Well, if you're an entrepreneur, you might start up a business in that new area, or you might start targeting people who speak those languages. Perhaps all the media on a certain topic is only in one language, but you want it to be in another language. Congratulations, you are now the dedicated person for that topic in this new language. There are many use cases for developing a second language, and there's many other benefits to it, but how would I go about actually learning a new language? Many of us want to do this each year. We set it as our New Year's resolution. Oh, I'm going to learn French or Spanish or Japanese or Chinese or whatever. This is how I would go about learning a new language, and this is research that I compiled from many expert language learners, polyglots. actually tested for myself to see how well do they work, and generally it works fairly well. And I've seen some great results personally for myself as I use this method. Start off by learning the basics. Alphabets, sounds, basic grammar rules, a couple words, nothing too complicated, just the absolute basic building blocks of the language. Say you were interested in learning Japanese, that would mean learning the two basic alphabets of hiragana and katakana, learning the basic sounds around them, getting a general understanding of the grammar rules. You don't have to get everything, but the general sentence structures that you're going to see throughout most of the language. Then find your basic words that you're going to hear a bunch. Next is find as much input as you possibly can. This is going to be shows in the target language with subtitles in said target language. As a note, a lot of people, or a lot of times in schools, you might be watching a movie in Spanish, but they'll have subtitles in English. That's not helping you learn Spanish. Studies have shown that if you have a movie in one language but subtitles in the native language of the watcher, they're not developing their target language skills, they're developing their native language skills, and they don't make any progress in that target language that they're trying to learn. But if you watch a movie in just the target language with no subtitles, or even better, a show in the target language with target language subtitles, you're developing the language much faster than you would be than if you were just watching it in the target language with no subtitles. So, a show in the target language with target language subtitles. Find games, books, podcasts in your target language. Ideally, this is you trying to find some sort of comprehensive input, things that you can understand through context clues, but maybe not everything. But what most people get wrong about this is they get hung up on trying to find the perfect comprehensive input, the perfect thing where, oh, I can just barely understand this, and they spend too much time doing research and thinking, oh, this thing's a little bit too hard for me, oh, this thing's a little too easy for me. Guess what? You're never going to find something that's absolutely perfect. So what's more important is that you find something that you're actually going to stick with. So if you're interested in learning Japanese like I am, then you might want to find a couple shows that you've watched a couple times before, or you might want to find something that's fairly simple or fairly interesting. If you love reading and there's a book that you've read 100 times, see if you can find that book in your target language. This can be supplemented by basic YouTube language lessons where perhaps someone will help you go through general grammar rules one by one, or might introduce you to some interesting concepts that you might not run into all too often through just pure language exposure. But generally, if you do this for a long enough time, exposing yourself to the language, our brains are really good at developing patterns and recognizing patterns. Do this for long enough, and you're going to learn the language. This is exactly how you learned your first language. You didn't learn it by sitting down and memorizing word lists. You learned it by getting a crap ton of input for hours and hours and days and weeks and months and years of natural language input. And eventually, you start to develop patterns and realize, oh, this is the sentence order that I'm supposed to speak in. No one sat you down and said, okay, this is the proper sentence order of how you speak and how you do things before you started going to school. And you could speak pretty well before you started going to school. It wasn't perfect, but you got there. And over time, you were able to learn and develop these patterns in your brain to be able to speak like a normal human being. The next skill I want to talk about is trade skills. As the global population continues to grow older and retire, fewer children are being born, and white-collar jobs/skills are still pushed as quote-unquote better than blue-collar jobs and skills and trade skills. Being skilled in hand trades will become ever more valuable. For example, have you tried to hire a plumber, electrician, or other type of trade contractor? It's a nightmare, and it's only going to get worse in the future as fewer and fewer people choose to go into the trades professionally, at least until robots become sufficiently advanced where they can do the trade skills instead of humans. But if you're interested in developing a trade skill, here's how I would go about doing it. First off, choose a trade skill. This is just going to be a general overview of how I would develop a trade skill of choice. So choose one, choose a project that you're interested in doing related to that skill, or research beginner level projects related to that skill. Once I have my project, I look for some simple guides on how to do said project. Follow those guides wherever possible, then make your best guesses when you can't find a guide or can't get good information on it. Do some problem solving, kind of figure it out, and eventually you'll figure out, oh, this is how I do this thing. This is how I solve this problem, or how I finish this project. Finish a project, reflect on it. How could it have been better? What mistakes did you make, etc. Move on to the next project. This whole thing is just project-based learning in a nutshell. And this is exactly how I developed my woodworking skills. I started off by making an electric violin and said, okay, that's cool. What did I learn from this? Then I moved on to making a bamboo flute and a bamboo clarinet and learned making other musical instruments. It's like, cool. I've developed my woodworking skills and now I know how to develop and create a majority of woodworking pieces. It's kind of cool and kind of fun. I did the same thing for silversmithing, for lockpicking, for basically any other kind of trade skill that I know today. It's all done through project-based learning. Have an objective, have a project, have something you want to work on, find some guides, work out problems that you encounter and overcome them and learn along the way. The next skill I want to talk about is actionable psychology and sociology. This probably seems like a weird one to you, but there's a few reasons I think these skills are going to be more valuable in the years to come. By understanding psychology and sociology in an actionable way, you can become better at understanding, working with, directing, and ultimately manipulating, for no better word for it, people into doing what you need them to do. This isn't inherently a bad thing, it all depends on how you use these skills. How is this different from theoretical psychology and sociology? The key difference is that with actionable psychology and sociology, you're actually using what you learn to drive certain results. A lot of people who love studying psychology and sociology do so from a theoretical perspective where they think, oh, it's cool, I have an understanding of why someone does this. They understand, but they don't really do anything with that. A good example of this is observing how people reacted to the recent election results, then using psychological principles to better communicate with these people. If someone is having a mental breakdown due to one candidate being elected over another, the theoretical psychologist might have some ideas of what is happening mentally, but is less likely to be able to do something about it. Whereas the actionable psychologist would be more likely to be able to help the person having a mental breakdown chill out and get back to work. So how would I develop these skills? Fairly similarly to how I would develop theoretical psychology and sociology. Study various types of psychology. Doesn't have to be formal either. Many podcasts and books can teach you a lot about human psychology, how people work, how human groups work. And seeing how these groups work, you can start to figure out, okay, this is how people do things, this is why people do things. Then you can start to see what happens if I do this, what happens if I do that. Watch people and how they react to things. Ask people questions that push their beliefs and boundaries a little and see what happens. And finally, this involves a lot of trial and error. See what works, see what doesn't, just experiment. And over time, you can develop your repertoire of sorts of psychological manipulation to help get people to do ultimately what you want them to do. Next, let's talk about personal finances and accounting. People are feeling the economic squeeze and yet choose to make poor personal economic decisions regularly. I don't get why. For some reason, people just don't seem to understand some very basic economic principles that could really help them out. Trust me when I say having the basic knowledge of personal accounting and finances can take you from living from paycheck to paycheck to having paid for all of your actual needs and still having money to go and do some stuff that you want to do. This was my reality while I was living in college. I worked with a lot of people who lived from paycheck to paycheck and were worried that they wouldn't have enough money to make it through the month, whereas I was making the same, if not a little bit less than a number of those people. I was able to budget properly to pay for my rent, to pay for my food, to pay for projects I wanted to do on the side and have fun, and still had money to invest left over. So, what I recommend for someone who's trying to develop their basic economic and finance skills, the quickest and simplest recommendation I would give is to just read the following 3 books. I Will Teach You to Be Rich, Die with Zero, and The Richest Man in Babylon. All 3 are great books and books that I recommend so frequently to people who want to learn basics of finances and basics of personal accounting. Aside from that, schedule weekly to monthly financial check-ins with yourself to see how you're doing, review your spending, decide what changes you want to make and make them, and perhaps consider getting help from someone you trust, and ideally someone who is in a better financial situation than you are, especially if you're having a hard time making changes on your own. This could be someone who helps you stay accountable to the changes you want to make, or perhaps someone that you give your credit card to and ask them to hold it hostage for you so you can't make poor decisions. And eventually, over time, you'll learn how to develop these habits for yourself. The 6th skill I would recommend developing more in 2025 and beyond is a cheap hobby skill. Hobbies are part of what makes life worth living, and hobbies don't have to be big, extra, or extravagant to be valuable. I'm not just talking about valuable in an economic sense, but also in a personal well-being sense. Not everything we do has to drive economic value for us, put money in our pockets or whatever. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just kick back, relax, and work on some fun project or develop some fun skill or hobby that you want to do. Here's how I would go about choosing what skill this would be. What are the skills and hobbies that I want to do? What costs less than X dollars to get everything I need to do? Then which of these things do I want to do the most? Or if you can't choose between things, like assign numbers to all of them and then roll a dice and then start there. It doesn't have to be all that complicated. Woodworking might be a great example of a cheap hobby. For me, when I started making my electric violin, my first instrument, we already had basic woodworking tools, and after I told a couple people about my project, I had some friends who were willing to donate wood for me to use to work on it with. So ultimately, my total cost for the project was probably less than $100, and I spent weeks, if not months, working on that project. So ultimately, over the span of a couple months, I spent maybe $100 at most on this project. It's a pretty good rate of return for investment versus time of enjoyment across the whole thing. So overall, pretty cheap hobby. If you want some other cheap hobbies, look at drawing, painting. Consider picking up a musical instrument. It's a one-time fee, and then you have plenty of lessons on YouTube to learn how to play it. Cheap hobbies don't just have to be cheap as in you only throw a little bit of money at it like a couple times. Sometimes a cheap hobby is you invest a decent chunk upfront, say with the example of a musical instrument. It might be pricey upfront for you to get, but because you use it for a long time and the joy and excitement you get out of using it makes it fun the whole time. Think about it like this. You put a bunch of money down upfront, then you spread out that cost across 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 10 months, a year, a couple years. You start to realize, wait a second, I might be paying $500 for this thing now, but I'm spreading out that $500 worth of enjoyment over the span of 2, 3, 5 years. Well, you've gone from $500 in like a day to $500 across 5 years or 10 years. It's like, wow, I'm really paying like maybe $100 this year to enjoy this one hobby. Okay, that's actually a pretty good deal. You get a lot of time out of it. Cheap hobbies don't just have to be hobbies where you spend very little money on it. They could be hobbies where you invest a bit more upfront, but you ultimately get more fun and enjoyment out of it in the long run. And finally, skill number 7, a skill that will get you ahead and differentiate yourself in your career. Sadly, I can't be very specific on what the skill is because it's going to vary greatly from career to career. Perhaps it's getting certified in a new software or a piece of machinery. Perhaps it's trying something new for a portfolio piece or for starting up a new side hustle, something like that. But here's how I'd go about choosing this kind of skill that I would want to develop for improving or developing my career. If you're trying to develop in a career, as in climb the hierarchy at your business or at your job, then perhaps ask your boss what skill or certification would make you more valuable and potentially give you a raise/promotion. See if your company could potentially sponsor you to develop said skill. Make a plan, go for it, learn and develop that skill, do it. And then if you present your findings or you present your thing to your boss and say, hey, you previously told me that if I develop this skill or develop these things, that I will get X result or X return. I might get a raise or I might be more likely to be placed higher in a promotion. I've done the thing, so it's time for you to hold up your end of the bargain. If they do, great. You just boosted yourself up in your career. If they don't, great. You can take your newfound skills and go apply at another company to say, I did this thing to develop my skills for this position. I now have the skills to help and work in this position. But that's just one path for you to work your way up the career hierarchy at your job. Another way that you can do it is, what skills do the people you want to be like have or use in their jobs regularly? You could go to someone who has a job that you want and say, hey, I want to follow you for a day. I want to see what skills you have that you actually use day to day for your job. Or just ask them, what is it that you actually do for your job? And figure out are the skills they're actually using day to day so that you can develop those skills and eventually get to that career that you want to have. If you're doing this for a business or for a side hustle, something like that, then it's ultimately just choosing a skill and saying, I'm going to develop this skill to the point where I can make money from doing it. And it's fairly simple from there. It's a similar process to what I discussed earlier on in the prompt engineering and AI related skills. Lay out your goals. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Research the available tools, research the available whatever for you to help you accomplish said goal. Choose your tools, choose whatever it is that you're going to do. Research the skill, how you're going to do it. Follow a few tutorials, work on it. Do project-based learning as I talked about in trade skills. Ultimately, this is the culmination of all the other skills that I talked about of learn it, use it, put it into practice, see what comes from the result. So those were my 7 skills that I think will be more valuable in 2025. What do you think? Are these skills going to be more valuable in the years to come, or am I off base? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode, then please share with a friend you think would like it, or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later. Ciao.